I'm not sure I can do this again, but I'm going to try. I just literally spent 20 minutes talking at the computer, explaining why a load of people are going to London today to protest once again about contaminated blood. And I didn't have it on video, I had it on photo, so it took a very nice photo of me and didn't record a bloody thing. It's hard enough talking about this without having to do it twice, because you muck it up the first time. And the reason I muck it up the first time is because my brain has been screwed up by this horrible virus that I've had, that theoretically I'm clear of, but it affects me every day. By the treatment that I've had, that was supposed to make me better, that made me more ill than I've ever been before. That affects my brain every day, let alone my body, let alone my mental state. Anyway, I've just sat here and tried to explain to you why I'm making this video, why these people are going to London, why I'm not going to London today to protest. After 30 years of protest, why we still don't feel like we've got anywhere near justice for being infected with contaminated blood products. And I think for first thing in the morning it went quite well. I felt like I'd said everything I needed to say, and I didn't record a bloody word of it. So I'm going to go again. I'm going to try and do it again. I'm going to try and explain to people who maybe haven't known me very long, or maybe don't know about, what happened to me as a child, to thousands of other people as children who were being treated by the NHS. What's happening today and why it's happening. There's a debate in the House of Commons this afternoon about contaminated blood and the support arrangements for those who've been affected. It's another debate. We've had many debates over the years, and every time bar this one I've been there, I've listened to supportive MPs, impassioned discussion about the wrongs that were done to us, about the inadequacies of the support and the help that we've been given financially and otherwise. And every time I've got my hopes up, and every time I've been disappointed. And you've no idea how upsetting that disappointment can be. And it compounds year after year as more people die, as we lose more affected victims. It gets harder and harder. And part of the reason why I'm unable to be there today is because my mental health has been affected such that I find it incredibly difficult to be there, to be surrounded by all my very good friends, none of whom are getting well, none of whom are free from struggle, because we all have been infected with these viruses. Every time you go, more people have died. And then you're faced with their family members who are grieving, who are having to still fight for some sort of recognition of what has been done to us. If you don't know the background of this, which you may not, because it doesn't often get a lot of publicity because we're a small group with a small voice, and it's not a trendy subject, it's a lengthy, it's been going on a long time, and the press don't necessarily want to cover something that's been going on a long time. The whole point of news is that it's new. Well, we're not new, we've been around for bloody ages, and we keep banging on about it, and they don't understand why we're still here, why we're still fighting. I'll try and explain that to you. I've got a bleeding disorder called von Willebrand's disorder, so That means my blood doesn't clot properly. I was diagnosed, because it's severe, before I was 1 year old. So since then, every time I had any kind of bleed, so any sort of trauma that caused me to bleed, a nose bleed, gum bleed, bruising, joint bleed, my mum and dad had to take me up to the hospital, and I'd have clotting factor treatment to replace the missing stuff from my blood that would help me to clot, that would help me to get better. What we didn't know at the time was that those clotting factor products were made from thousands of blood donations, and that the people who donated the blood sometimes had HIV, sometimes had hepatitis C. This was often the case when blood was taken from prisons in America, because it was a captive audience, because it was cheap, and this blood was taken knowing that there was the chance that it was infected by these viruses. These people are criminals. They're not necessarily the healthiest people to be taking blood from, but it was cheap. And we could get a lot out of it. And it was sent over to the UK. And it wasn't heat treated, potentially initially because heat treatment wasn't available, but even after heat treatment was available that could theoretically kill these viruses, it wasn't used because it was expensive. Decisions were made based on cost, that it wasn't worth heat treating these products because it cost too much. This has been proved. There is evidence out there to completely support this fact. Decisions were also made, believe it or not, and again this has been proved, that people within the blood disorder community, haemophiliac children, were experimented on. They were treated with contaminated blood products, with blood products that were knowingly contaminated with viruses, to see what would happen, to see if the viruses would be passed on or not. And these decisions were made because we were thought to be dispensable. We were thought to have a short-term lifespan anyway because of our bleeding disorders. Therefore, why not? Let's do some experimentation to see what the infection rates are like. Not only that, and that's pretty bad, but people weren't told of their infections. So when people were infected with hepatitis C and with HIV, these infections were tested for. They were noted on record as being positive, but they weren't actually told. This isn't in all cases, but in some cases this is absolutely true, that people were exposed to viruses, were tested for those viruses, were logged as being positive for those viruses, and not told. And these were people potentially in marital relationships, young people who weren't in marital relationships but who were sexually active. How can you not tell these people? Other people were infected as a direct result of people not being told. How horrific is that, to have infected your own wife with HIV because nobody bothers to tell you that you've actually got this? This happened. So, having kind of explained that background, you might think, well, God, of course they've done something. They've put some measures in place to actually recognise what happened. Well, yes. But would many sick, disabled, grieving people be going down to London today if those measures were adequate? No, they definitely wouldn't. We do not go down there for the hell of it. We force ourselves to go down there. Not in my case this time, because I just cannot. But there are many, many good but ill people in London this morning protesting and attending a debate because the government has not nearly recognised the damage that's been done. Multiple governments have not nearly recognised the damage that's been done. They've always avoided responsibility, not accepted liability, And even where they've said, oh, well, you know, we don't accept liability, but we will help, we will do something to support you, it's been derisory, it's been insulting. However, we've had to take it because what other choice do we have? So we've struggled with paltry sums of money. We've struggled with systems that have been set up allegedly to help us, but they've actually made our lives more difficult because we've had to go through hoops. Every time we've wanted some sort of help, we've had to prove our illness time and time again. And do you know what that does to your mental health? Having to try and explain why you need help, what your issues are, why you're ill, why you struggle, time and time again. It's not acceptable. So down we go to London once again. The debate on support for people who've been affected by contaminated blood was scheduled to take place around about 12:45 for 3 hours. Last night we were informed that our debate has now been pushed back because there's an emergency debate on the Tata Steel situation. Now, I appreciate that affects tens of thousands of people, but that is not a life or death situation. I appreciate that's an immediate situation that has just happened. Why does that make it more serious than something that's actually been ongoing for 30 plus years? So what is now happening is there is an emergency debate, and after that, which could be actually for 3 hours, there's our debate on contaminated blood, which again could run for potentially 3 hours. So people that are ill, that are disabled, that are grieving, have either travelled down yesterday or they're travelling down this morning. They're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning potentially to get on the road to go down to London, firstly to protest, to try and generate some press interest in our case because it's woefully lacking. And finally, we do seem to be getting some press support for what we're trying to say. So there's going to be a presence outside Parliament first thing this morning to do that. And that needs to happen because we've arranged with press that that's what's happening. So that's got to happen this morning. Then people have got to get into the Houses of Parliament and into the public gallery, potentially at 11:30 this morning, because they need to be in their seats to make sure that they have seats. And potentially people are going to have to sit there until 3:30 before the debate even starts. And if you leave, and you fully leave, you'll lose your seat. And you can't risk doing that, because if you then come back later and there's no seat available and you've gone all the way to London to be there to support this specific thing, you just wouldn't do it. So there's going to be people sat in these, and I can tell you they're not comfortable seats, for 5 or 6 hours, and then having to travel across London and get trains home again. It's just not good enough. But yet again, it's what we're subjected to. So what I'm asking the government to do is to scrap their proposed changes, which are woefully inadequate. They're touting it as being, oh, we're spending 125 million. Doing what? They're talking about tweaking the existing systems that are already there. They're talking in actual fact about taking measures that will make people worse off. They're certainly not talking about anything that will help somebody like me, who's theoretically clear of the virus, but who suffers with problems as a result of it every single day. And there's many people in my situation. What I would like the government to do is recognise infection as being what the wrong that was done. So everybody that was infected with a virus as a result of NHS treatment should be compensated, should have this recognised for the potential it can do, irrespective of what damage it's done now and what damage it potentially will do. What they're suggesting is that when I become more ill, I can go back to them and say, hi, I'm iller now, Please assess me. Please tell me if I can get some help. Please put me through a process of assessment. God knows what that'll be like. And then a year or so later, when I've got more ill, please assess me again. I need some more help. Please, can you just put me through this hideous process of assessment so that I could potentially get some more help? This is not acceptable. This is, for a kick-off, going to take the majority of the money of the budget that they're actually allocating to keep assessing people, to keep, from our point of view, reminding us and making us go through why we're even having to claim in the first place, why we're ill, what's going on. It's not acceptable. People should be given support for the fact that they were infected and for every possible outcome that could occur. Every one of us has had a virus within us for many, many years. There is damage that's been done by that. I've had 2 courses of treatment for it. That has done me damage. That has affected me for 13 years. All of this should be recognised. In my own case, I had interferon treatment very early on because I wanted to have children, because I wanted to be a mother. And if I'd have had children whilst I had hepatitis C, there was an incredibly high risk that I would have passed it on to the unborn child, that I would have passed it on when giving birth to the child because of my bleeding disorder and because of the possibility of my blood infecting the baby. So we made a decision early on that I would have the treatment that was available at the time, because it gave me the best chance of being free of the virus to be able to have a child and become a parent. So I went through 12 months of treatment, which was horrific. I lost my job, I lost my mind, I lost my health. And after the treatment finished, the virus came back. 4 years later, we tried again just before we got married, and I had another 6 months worth of treatment that again made me so ill I couldn't work, made me so ill I couldn't function. But this time it cleared the virus. This is good news. However, ever since then, I've not been well. I've had issues related either to the virus or to the interferon therapy that I had. And they've caused me to be unable to work for a lot of the time, to be unable to function for a lot of the time, and have basically taken away my quality of life. You may not think this if you know me. You may just think, God, well, you look well and you seem well. Well, it's an illusion. It's called putting on a positive front. And I will do this until I die, because that's the kind of person that I am. And I will fight through it. However, I'm telling you this now because I just want you to know the reality, what we are all dealing with on a daily basis. So having had the treatment and being free of the virus, theoretically, the idea was that we would try for a family. We did this, and it didn't happen. And it turned out I had not very good fertility. So we went through IVF treatments on the NHS and then at our own cost while I was still able to work, and they failed. We then decided not to continue because I wasn't well enough to actually be a parent, even if I did become pregnant. So that was the case for many years. And then we talked about it and decided that our last chance was surrogacy, was for me not to actually carry the child and give birth because I wasn't well enough to do that. But we had a friend who volunteered to be our surrogate. So that was our plan. That was what we did. We spent over 2 years going through the process of surrogacy, of me trying to get myself well enough to go through the process of IVF that would be needed to generate the eggs that would then become the embryo that we would hopefully implant into our surrogate. We actually did the process in January and February of this year. It's cost us a lot of money, which we haven't had. I asked the Caxton Fund, which is what was set up to help people with hepatitis C when they needed support financially, for some help to actually help fund our surrogacy attempt, and they turned me down. There was no charitable need for it, apparently. So we've borrowed money off friends and family to help us pay for it, for which we're eternally grateful. When we went through the process and I had all the drugs to stimulate eggs production, I didn't get any viable eggs. I produced one egg that was extracted, and this egg wasn't mature enough to be used. Luckily, we were able to use a frozen embryo that we'd had from our previous IVF back in 2010, and that was implanted, and we all felt incredibly positive about it and felt that this was it. It was going to work. We were going to have a family. And 2 weeks later we did a pregnancy test and it was negative, and we did another and it was negative. By the third one we had to accept that that was it. And this was our last shot. This was my last shot. I'd made that decision before we started, because I can't put myself through it anymore, because my body doesn't actually react to the drugs. There's no point in trying again. We have to accept that that is it now. And then a friend said to me, well, what about the treatment? Would that have affected your ability to conceive? And I hadn't even thought about it. But when I looked into it, she was right. There is now evidence that interferon treatment negatively impacts your fertility. And I believe that's what happened in my case, that the interferon treatment that I went on to enable me to become a parent actually destroyed my chances. Now, this may not have been known at the time because I was taking the treatment fairly early on, but it's known now. However, it's not something that I expect the government to acknowledge, to accept, and to compensate me for. We shall see. What we basically want is we want a full and comprehensive and final acknowledgement of what happened to us, of the fact that we were infected as innocent victims of NHS treatment where decisions had been made that meant that this treatment was not safe, that meant that this treatment was contaminated, meant that we were contaminated, and that we have been suffering from the effects of that ever since. Not only that, we've been fighting for justice ever since. All of this needs to be recognised, and we need to be put into a situation where we don't have to go begging for help. We don't have to be reassessed every time our health changes. We just want to be able to live. Those of us that are left want to be able to live. Those of us that have already died would want their families to be supported, to not have to struggle because of the fact that their health, their dignity, their quality of life, their ability to work, their lives were taken away by these contaminations. What the government is proposing is inadequate. It is not going to give us this. This is why we continue to protest. The Scottish Government is actually taking a stand and doing something significantly more than the English Government is proposing. However, it's still not enough. We just want to be able to forget about this and to deal with it as best we can. And we can't do this at the moment. We cannot do this unless it's recognised, unless it's properly supported, unless our medical, our mental, our physical and our financial needs are met. That is what we need. That is what we're fighting for. And we won't stop until that is met, or until there are none of us left. I'm wishing everybody who's there today the very best, and I'm very sorry I'm not there to be counted with you, but I cannot face it again. And I know I'm weak because of that, when there are people there who are far more ill than I am. But I want you to know that I'm there with you in spirit. And I will be watching today, and hoping to God we can effect some change finally. Hoping to God that the press support us and make this as big as it deserves to be. Thanks for watching all of this.